Okay, so as we transition into the first segment, we will explore challenges individuals face with a criminal history, um, especially when they're seeking stable, affordable housing. Today, we have two esteemed speakers who will provide legal and policy perspective on this issue. Lanaya McDonald, Reentry Administrator with the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections Office of Reentry. Lanaya oversees housing initiatives, statewide coalitions, and certificate of qualification for employment and housing processes, otherwise known as CQE and CQH. Lanaya brings over 23 years of experience with Lucas County Job and Family Services, 12 plus years working in reentry courts, and 13 years in the U.S. Army Reserves. Holding multiple undergraduate and graduate degrees in organizational development and counseling from the University of Toledo and Spring Arbor University, Lanaya is also a licensed mental health and chemical dependency professional. She will share insights on House Bill 50, otherwise HB 50, and its implications for housing and rental challenges for those with a criminal history. Linnea?
All right. All right. So my name is Lanaya. I work for the Department of Reentry for Department of Corrections. And I am going to talk to you briefly about the Certificate of Qualification for Housing. This is fairly new, and so, we've been trying to do our due diligence in getting this information out. What is a CQH? So, a Certificate of Qualification for Housing is basically a new legislation that was passed in June of 2024. It was then effective September 20th of 2024. And a certificate of qualification of housing basically is a tool that helps remove barriers for those individuals who have been justice involved. By no means does it guarantee that someone is going to get housing, but what it does is it allows housing providers to look at those individuals on a case-by-case basis and offer them affordable, stable housing. And I'll say that it is imperative that we do this in this climate because we have a housing crisis all over the country, and then those individuals who are then um, just as involved have even more barriers than just an average person that may be homeless, may have lost their job or something like that. And so this legislation, when it was when they were talking about it, I can tell you the Office of Reentry was very excited. So I'm not sure who knows about the Certificate of Qualification for Employment, which this was drafted similar to that. And what a CQE is, it helps remove barriers for those trying to get employment and or licenses. So this, having the CQH, is just another tool to help those people who may have been justice involved at some point in their life. It could have been when they were 18 and have never done anything ever again in their life, but it comes up on that background check. There are two ways that someone who's justice involved could acquire a certificate of qualification for housing. One is while they're incarcerated. While they're incarcerated, if they complete the things that they have to do to get a certificate of achievement of employability. And some of those things may be education, a vocational training, um, volunteer hours, things like that to get that certificate of achievement and employability, as well as take a tenant readiness course, which we have contracted with Ready to Rent. They're able to get that certificate of qualification for housing prior to being released. Now, say someone gets out and they're under supervision. As if they're under supervision and they complete the requirements for a CAE while on supervision, they can also then get that certificate of qualification for housing. But it must be within that 1 year of them being released and they must be on supervision. If none of those things apply and someone gets out of incarceration, and they are having issues getting housing, they can apply to the courts, and that would be the Common Pleas Court of whatever city that they are staying in the state of Ohio. And basically, what they would do is they would go to the county common pleas court, fill out a petition, and then that petition would be researched. They will look, like, say someone files in Franklin County, but their charges were in Cuyahoga County. An investigation is done by Franklin County, getting all of that information before it's presented to a judge and or magistrate. Once that is done, if there's no issues, like for instance, sometimes people apply and maybe they're still on supervision. They cannot be on supervision. They have to be done with everything related to incarceration. If they are not, then what happens is then they will deny that certificate of qualification for housing, very similar to how a CQE is processed. Oh, before I go to the next slide. So let's talk about some time frame. So I was saying within 1 year of release of incarceration, if someone is still on supervision, if someone is no longer incarcerated, they're not on supervision or anything, and they file directly with the courts, they would have to wait 1 year if they have a felony or 6 months if they have a misdemeanor. And we get the questions all the time, well, why are those time frames there? And what I tell people is this is better than nothing. We understand that people need housing right away. We get it, but this is a step in the right direction. And so hopefully moving forward, we may be able to get those time frames removed. But currently there is a 1 year waiting period if there's a felony and a 6 month waiting period if there is a misdemeanor. So, baby steps are better than no steps. And so, again, this is something that we're doing to help remove some of those barriers and those stigmas because someone has been incarcerated doesn't mean they're going to be a bad tenant. And we hear that from housing providers all the time. And I can tell you, talking to different housing providers who have given people who have been just as involved a chance will tell you that, there's some of the most humble tenants that they have, and that they pay on time and they don't, tear up their properties and all those stigmas that come along with being justice involved. So our hope is that this certificate of qualification for housing will continue to break down those stigmas. Why should a CQH matter? So I can tell you that before this legislation was enacted, the Office of Reentry did some meetings with housing providers, housing associations, and all of those things. And so one of the things that we heard from housing providers, well, two things. One is that they wanted some guarantees that people who are just as involved were not going to tear up their houses and all those things. And the other thing was that they wanted them to have some type of tenant education. And so we heard that. And so it was nice that we were able to give some input when this bill was being written. And so what the CQH does is it tells a housing provider, hey, this person has done these things. They've served all their sanctions, but they've had some programming. They've had some education training. They've had some tenant education and budgeting training. And so those are the things that kind of are encompassed, like not said with the CQH, but that is what we wrote that information in to signify. We hear you, we hear what you're saying. And so these things we're doing to make sure that these individuals who have been justice impacted have these things. Um, you know, I think that some people assume that because someone is justice involved, that they can't pay rent, they can't do all these things. And so having two ways of allowing people to gather to be able to get a CQH, whether it's from our department or from the courts, if the courts say, hey, this person has done all these things, we find that people are more likely to give them a fair chance. One thing that I didn't mention, and I'm sorry, when I was talking about the petition, if the petition has to be filed in court, there is a $50 filing fee, and that is capped at $50. What we realized, even with the CQE that I was talking about previously, is that for a period of time, different counties were paying different, were charging different amounts. So that amount is set at $50. Um, And finally, just another thing that why a CQH matters, because it really tells a housing provider, you can give this person a chance. And guess what? You're not going to get sued. If someone tries to say, oh, I'm going to sue this housing provider because they let someone who used to be in prison rent next door to me, they can't be held liable. They aren't going to get sued because someone who was just as involved is now staying next door, which unfortunately we know those things happen. One other thing I'd like to touch on is a CQH, again, is not a guarantee. And if someone has a conviction for a sex offense or arson or something like that, a CQH does not preclude those things. They still have reporting requirements and all of those things. So again, it's just to allow a housing provider to look at that individual as an individual, not their number, not their crime. Revocation. So CQH can be revoked only if a person is convicted of another felony or pleads guilty to a felony. So they can be revoked. They are not, once you get one, it's not like it's good for a year, is good for 2 years, is good unless it's revoked, unless that individual is not charged, but actually convicted or pleads guilty to another felony. So other than that, the certificate of qualification is good. It's only good in the state of Ohio. We get those questions all the time. The legislation is specific to Ohio. And so as long as someone meets those requirements, whether they're incarcerated or whether they get it once they're out and they file directly through the courts, it is good indefinitely. And that is the conclusion of my portion.
Thank you, Linnea.